To apply for a marketing authorization, either a valid GMP certificate issued by the Ministry of Industry and Trade should be in place, or the decision on the certificate should be pending. Local clinical data should be included in the file unless exemptions or biowaivers apply. The assessment is carried out by the institution under auspices of the Ministry of Health, that is FGBU, which was mentioned earlier. The assessment procedure takes 110 business days, which equals to 150 calendar days. Where observations arise during the assessment procedure, the applicant is furnished with the list of questions and the assessment is suspended. The applicant should satisfactorily respond to a list of questions in 90 business days, that is approximately 130 calendar days. During the assessment, verification of the finished product specification test methods is carried out by the laboratory department of the assessment institution. This topic will be discussed further. In case of placing on the Russian market of generic or biosimilar products, a reference product shall be authorized in Russia, and the appropriate studies, for example bioequivalence studies, should be carried out using this Russian reference product. This needs to be considered in advance. Where this condition is not fulfilled and there is no applicable reference product on the Russian market, a generic, hybrid, IMD or biosimilar product might be recognized as a standalone or new product, necessitating submission of a full non-clinical and clinical data package. In certain cases, it is possible to persuade the regulators and assessors that full non-clinical and clinical data package is not needed, and the thorough bibliographic dossier will address all potential safety and efficacy issues. Verification of the test methods included in the specification is mandatory during the assessment within granting marketing authorization or variation the marketing authorization, where proposed variations involve manufacturing or quality issues of the finished product. In more than 99% of cases, the verification is carried out at the assessment institution's facilities, and only in small amount of cases where the assessment institution does not have appropriate equipment or methods, the on-site verification of test methods is possible. Vast amount of assessors' observations is related to such method verification. As was mentioned previously, instead of using specification, test methods are verified against a normative document. The normative document generally resembles the specification, but there are no formal rules of establishing a normative document, except the Russian state pharmacopoeia. It is important to keep in mind that the state pharmacopoeia is not harmonized with any other pharmacopoeia, neither the USP, nor European pharmacopoeia, nor JP, nor international pharmacopoeia. Moreover, when establishing pharmacopoeial texts, no validation or meaningful laboratory testing takes place, so the wording, acceptance criteria, and method description might be unsubstantiated experimentally. Also, when the assessment institution carries out verification of test methods, it doesn't perform any validation or manufacturer's method transfer, so the observations of the assessors might be related to such defects in analysis rather than to true issues discovered during the method verification. Therefore, a local partner is needed to draw up the normative document which will satisfy Russian assessors. According to Russian regulations, recognition of foreign authorization is possible in case of a valid agreement between the Russian government and the government of the country where an applicant is established. So far, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Industry and Trade do not recognize foreign marketing authorizations, GMP certificates, etc. Non-clinical and clinical data is accepted where those studies have been conducted based on generally accepted guidelines, that is GCP, GLP. However, at least one clinical study should be conducted in Russia unless exemptions apply. Obtaining marketing authorization in the European Union, including European Union member states, United States, Canada, Australia, is taken into account, but is not directly recognized. Where a medicinal product was granted an authorization in the above regions, it is a great support for justification that the applied product is eligible for entering the Russian market. One of the reasons is that these regions' competent authorities have English language pharmaceutical web portals, so that marketing authorization is easily verifiable. where granting a marketing authorization is expected in those regions, it is advisable to provide information on the outcome of this procedure before applying in Russia. A detailed explanation of regulatory strategy taken by the applicant is of a high value and allows to prevent potential problems due to inappropriate development approaches. Moreover, data provided should satisfy generally accepted scientific principles, for example as outlined in the ICH, FDA, or EMA scientific guidelines. In 2019, new labeling regulations will become effective in Russia. These regulations are intended to ensure full traceability of any medicinal product placed on the Russian pharmaceutical market, from its manufacturer across the whole supply chain to the final user. The movement of each pack will be traceable in each dealing between any supplier and purchaser. The equivalent measures will be taken at the Eurasian Economic Union level. This is different from the European Union requirements, since Russian labeling regulations will apply to all categories of medicinal products, not only prescription-only medicines, and traceability should be assured at each step of the supply chain till the end user. At the same time, no legally binding technical specifications were established to date, and all supply chain members need to be prepared to invest in facilities to comply with the new labeling regulations. Approaches to authorization of biosimilars for marketing are close to the European Medicines Agency rules. In particular, the Russian Assessment Institution has published a guide which contains translated EMA general and product-specific guidelines on biosimilar development. In line with the European Union rules, the guide suggests a step-by-step approach to the development of biosimilar products. At the same time, general provisions of Russian pharmaceutical legislation apply. For instance, at least one local clinical trial is still mandatory, unless the product is orphan. Safety tolerability testing in healthy volunteers within phase 1 studies are not accepted. Also, at least one multiple dose toxicity study is generally needed. Moreover, within granting a marketing authorization for a biosimilar product, an interchangeability analysis is carried out by the assessors. The same analysis is conducted for generic products. The approaches to establishing the interchangeability favor generic or biosimilar manufacturers and intended to squeeze out foreign innovative manufacturers from the market. It is worth mentioning that the EMA, EU, or US authorization might not be a sufficient justification for acceptable safety or efficacy of a biosimilar product. For instance, in the situation with a certain biosimilar monoclonal antibody product, the initial application was refused since several additional cases of tuberculosis on the biosimilar product have occurred. Tuberculosis is a disease of concern for the Ministry of Health. Therefore, such an explained increase was considered unacceptable and the application was rejected. The new application with a detailed justification of clinical irrelevance of those cases was accepted, and the marketing authorization was granted. This case underlines the importance of the communications with the regulators. Hence, rigorous regulatory affairs support is crucial in dealing with the Russian government agencies. Incrementally modified drugs, IMD, or hybrid applications, or Section 505(b)(2) applications are not specified in Russian pharmaceutical legislation. Any product is considered either new, generic, combination, biological, biosimilar, herbal, or homeopathic. This list is restrictive. The product category should be declared in advance in the application form. IMD products may be considered either generic or new, or combination, where appropriate. The requirements for the data package depend on the ability of the applicant to justify that the product is closer to generic, not the new, in order to minimize the extent of data needed. Regulatory affairs support might be of great value to achieve this goal. The situation is different within the Eurasian Economic Union legal framework, where hybrid applications are considered an appropriate legal basis for authorization for marketing. The product is considered to be orphan in Russia if it is solely intended to treat an orphan disease or make a medical diagnosis of the orphan disease. The disease or condition is considered orphan if its prevalence is less than 10 per 100,000 people, that is 1 per 10,000 people of Russian population. This is 5 times less than in the European Union or other EAEU countries. The Russian government maintains a list of orphan diseases, which comply with the legal definition of an orphan disease. Although it is in Russian, the list contains ICD-10 codes, so English equivalents of orphan diseases can be found. In order to designate a medicinal product as orphan, the condition, disease, to be treated or diagnosed needs to be recognized as such. The designation procedure for a medicinal product is carried out within granting a marketing authorization. Where orphan status for a disease or condition is recognized, the requirement on local trials is waived. Early consultation with local regulatory affairs agencies is encouraged to clarify the regulatory strategy. Sometimes it is possible to put a disease or condition into the list of orphan diseases. This procedure is not related to marketing authorization or clinical trial application procedures and processed by the different department of the Ministry of Health. For orphan drugs, accelerated assessment is envisaged, although it is of relatively little value for applicants. Orphan products are reimbursed by the federal or state government. It is also worth mentioning that unlike the EU or US, pediatric development is not mandatory in Russia as well as in the Eurasian Economic Union, although this issue is not directly related to the orphan products. Regulatory communications are crucial for successful outcome of any regulatory procedure. However, miscommunication between Russian regulators and foreign companies' headquarters occurs frequently, which might delay entering the market or even abandon the attempts for placing the product on the Russian market. In Russia, communications with the competent authorities or assessors are possible only within the marketing authorization application or clinical trial application procedure. It takes Q&A format. Assessors or the MOH officials send their written observations and accept only written response prepared by the applicant. Oral explanations are extremely rare and take place in the exceptional circumstances determined by the MOH officials on a case-by-case basis. No written protocols exist for such communications. Scientific or procedural advice delivered by the assessors is also not envisaged by Russian legislation. That is, pre-IND, IND, pre-NDA meetings, protocol assistance, etc. are not possible. Moreover, although many people call it scientific advice, companies generally seek for procedural rather than scientific advice because it is recognized that scientific advice capacities of the Russian assessment institution are limited and not on a par with such agencies like the US FDA or EMA. However, petitioning to the Ministry of Health is allowed, but answers will be rather unspecific, and the petitioning procedure is not connected with the processing of the application, so the decision on the application might be made before the petition is duly considered. The best approach when petitioning is to propose one or more strategies and seek a nod from the Ministry of Health. A petitioner should not expect that the officials prepare a robust strategy from scratch. If an inappropriate local regulatory affairs consultant is chosen, indirect communication between the Ministry of Health or assessors and foreign companies' headquarters might be misleading due to misunderstanding between the parties. We recommend thoroughly select an appropriate local regulatory affairs consultant. It shall have at least minimal regulatory experience. Moreover, due to small and slow feedback from the MOH, the best approach is to pre-qualify a marketing authorization application dossier with at least one regulatory affairs company. Questions, observations sent by assessors or MOH officials to the applicant may be vague or ambiguous. Therefore, deciphering techniques are essential in understanding what is being asked and how to deal with the issues raised by assessors. For instance, sometimes when the assessors ask for additional studies, it may mean that the justification of absence thereof might also be accepted. When clarifying or explaining outstanding issues, comprehensive knowledge of Russian regulatory environment is essential, because any scientific explanation needs to be in line with the current legal framework. Official batch release is carried out by the laboratories designated by the Roszdravnadzor for these purposes. The list of products for which official batch release is mandatory differs from the European Union approach. Almost any biological product might be subject to official batch release. For instance, unlike the European Union, where only plasmid-derived medicinal products and immunological products should be officially released, in Russia, recombinant DNA technology-derived products also need to be released officially. So far, there are no official guidelines on tests to be carried out within the official batch release. The EDQM's OCABR guidelines are not applicable. The tests are determined individually within granting a marketing authorization when approving the normative document. The test list is usually considerably shorter than in the ICH member states. Moreover, outdated test methods might be used, for example, abnormal toxicity testing, and this might be challenging for some marketing authorization holders. The supply category is determined individually within granting a marketing authorization. Two categories are possible: a prescription-only medicine or OTC product. No such categories as pharmacy medicine or hospital medicine are envisaged. Russian legislation does not provide any specific rules for determining the supply category. However, an abbreviated version of the European Commission guideline is used unofficially, but it is not legally binding. Since the European Commission document is available in English, it is possible to find all criteria used by Russian assessors for changing the supply category, which are outlined in detail in that document. Any product claiming the OTC category should comply with those criteria. Russian pharmaceutical legislation allows accelerated approval for certain groups of medicinal products. Where the accelerated procedure is approved, granting a marketing authorization should be completed within 90 days, which is 60 days shorter than the normal procedure. It is one of the shortest accelerated procedures in the world. The following product classes are eligible for accelerated approval: orphan products, first 3 generic products, and pediatric use only medicines. The product is considered pediatric use only, where such a product is indicated for children use only. Some products are specifically ineligible for accelerated approval, including biological products and combinations of previously authorized substances. This concludes our introduction to the Russian pharmaceutical legislation. We hope that the provided information will help you to better understand the basics of the rules for entering the Russian pharmaceutical market. The requirements both for issuing a marketing authorization and approving a clinical trial are quite loose, but it is expected they will be replaced by the Eurasian Economic Union standards by the end of 2020. Currently, great efforts are being made to establish the EAEU legal framework and put it into operation. We appreciate any feedback, especially if you are interested in further discussion of the regulatory affairs in Russia. For instance, you can reach me on Facebook or LinkedIn or by the other appropriate means. Thanks for listening. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. More to come.